So we're going to cover some of maybe the misunderstandings in regards to what works play in Christianity. Certainly that will cover Jehovah's Witnesses, that will cover Mormons, that will cover even Roman Catholics, which I wouldn't call a cult per se, but certainly they've made some mistakes in how they interpret Scripture as well. So unfortunately I gave you a preview of my next slide, so this won't come as a shock to you. But really this particular statement here, which, why is it that this always happens? I should just give up on using this thing. This is really the sentence that I live my life by. Now before everybody gets up and runs out, especially the new girl in the front row, I think if you give it some time, you'll actually understand exactly what I mean. Never read a Bible verse. They're just words on a page, and you shouldn't take them literally. Now, of course, that's completely opposite of everything that you've ever been taught, right? So what we're going to do is actually explain how I've come to this conclusion, and I promise it's not as bad as you may think. So let's start with the first portion of it, which is this here: never read a Bible verse. Now, the reason why you're shocked by this is because you're focusing on the read a Bible. You want to focus on the verse. Anyone else hear that? My phone. So, the verse portion of it. Never read a Bible verse. Not that you shouldn't read the Bible, but just not the verse. Because let's just look at it from a historical standpoint. This dude right here, Robert Estienne. It's interesting format. Anyway, in 1551 and 1557, respectively, is when old Bob here added the verses and the chapters to the Bible. They were not there originally. So when you read a verse, you're not necessarily getting the idea behind what the author was intending to convey. That makes sense? It's not so bad now, is it? So when you read a verse and you proof text based on a verse, it's very easy for you to take what the author was trying to say out of context. You see, the Bible has a particular meaning in mind. It contains objective truth. The words themselves don't have some sort of magical meaning, do they? If you take them out of context, you're just reading words on a page. No different than any other book. If you miss the idea or the meaning behind what the author was trying to convey, then the words themselves are just words on a page. And you can make the Bible say whatever you want. In fact, I had somebody, a Christian, come up to me and tell me that this is the way you should read the Bible. Read it for some personal, subjective meaning. Let God speak peace into your heart. As long as you feel peace about it, we'll cover that a little bit later, it's fine. And my response was, really? Is that how you always read other people's mail? Just kind of threw them off. Think about it. 2/3 of the New Testament is mail, right? Certainly we have, whether it be the authors of the epistles through Paul, writing to a particular church, or whether it be the book of Acts written to Theophilus. We are reading mail that was written to another person. Now, do you honestly think that when Paul wrote the book to the Corinthians, that he expected the Corinthians to get it and just read whatever they wanted to read out of it? Of course not. He had a particular thing that he was trying to teach them. If words don't have meaning, then we can't communicate with one another at all. And you can take whatever I say completely out of context. Now, a Biola graduate actually told me this story of a lecture that he was giving in regard on moral relativism. And after the lecture was over, a gentleman came up to him and told him a story about what happened in his church. There was a woman who was agonizing over whether or not she could divorce her husband. So she turned to the scriptures, opened them up. Certainly, I'm sure we've all done that. Put the book down, open it up, and then read the first thing that comes to mind, like it has some magical meaning. And she opened up the Bible, and Ephesians 4:24 came up. Put on a new man. So she took that subjective personal meaning for her life, put on a new man, divorced her husband, and married the worship leader. Now, do you think that that's what Ephesians 4:24 is trying to say? Of course not. In fact, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. There is no God, Isaiah said still. Maybe there is a God, but he just lives in Israel. There's nowhere else. He's not omniscient. Certainly that's not what Isaiah is trying to convey, is it? Never read a Bible verse. If you do, they're just words on a page. They have no particular spiritual meaning if you take them out of context. Let me catch up here. And this is absolutely the number one reason for heresies and cults. And you know what's worse? We do it all the time. Good Bible-believing Christians get a verse under their craw and stick to that verse, stick onto that promise, and never check to see if the context of that promise is really for them. So what we're going to talk about today is quite simply this concept called exegesis. Okay? Exegesis is just a fancy word for draw out. What is it that the author intended to say? I want to try to figure out what that meaning is. The opposite is what the lady did when she divorced her husband and married the worship leader. She did what's called eisegesis, which means she read into the Scripture what her meaning was. So we're going to talk about exegesis. Now, the funny thing is that for some reason, these things are common knowledge when we read other books. We would never read a book and try to read some personal subjective meaning into it, but when we read the Bible, what do? We feel that there has to be some magical power behind the Word, so we just become crazy in the way that we look at these things. And so some of this is a no-brainer. We do it all the time. It's built right into us. But we're going to cover it, and we're going to show you some examples of how this happens, some of which people in this room, certainly I have, done in the past. So these are the 5 points that are really important in regards to exegesis. There are others, but these are the easy ones. What are you laughing at? So, I can't get through this without mocking you at some point. So what is the context behind the passage? Who is it written to? Whose promise is it, really? What's the history behind the passage? This is one that we mess up a lot on. What type of writing is it? Is it poetic? Is it prophetic? Is it historical? What kind of writing is it? And then what's an accurate paraphrase? And we're going to cover that towards the end, but that's by far the best way to solve many of these theological misunderstandings. So let's talk about the context a little bit, although we have up until this point. But the context is... Let's go here. What is the specific meaning that the author was trying to convey? I know I've repeated myself, but really that's what the context is. Here's an example that we use, just as an example of how we might actually misunderstand reading the Scripture. This is, of course, Romans 8:28. Although I took the courtesy of putting all of Romans 8:28 there, really, what do you hear? You hear, all things work together for good. That's it, right? In fact, we have a song that we sing here that I've heard on occasion, that all things work together for my good. So that's not even the Scripture. So now we've converted that even to the goodness being God's goodness, all the way to the goodness being my goodness. But regardless of that, there's more to this, right? Usually the standard interpretation is, God is going to bless me and take away calamity, I'm going to be prosperous. Usually this is a verse that we throw at people when they're feeling bad. They're having some bad stuff happening in their life, right? But let's read it further. Never read a Bible verse. We'll look at verse 29. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And to those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. The object of this particular verse is God and his goodness, not ours, but more importantly, it has nothing to do with prosperity or calamity. It has to do with weaving situations in such a way that he's going to conform us into the image of his Son, Christ. And by the way, he's going to conform us. He's the one that's doing all of the work in that particular verse. So when we use that verse to prove that when I'm having a bad day or a bad week and I turn to this promise, the question is that actually what the context says? So here's a Jehovah's Witness classic. I said I would go into cults a little bit. So, is this a blessing or a curse? John 20:28. What's going on here? Thomas just met Jesus for the first time. He sees Jesus. Jesus asks him to put his hands in his holes in his side. And Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." Now, rightly so, Jehovah's Witnesses say the "and" is not there. So they say that what Thomas is saying is a curse. He sees this dude standing there and he goes, basically saying, "Oh my God, my Lord, my God." So he's cussing. So again, never read a Bible verse, right? What we want to do is take more than just John 20:28 here and read the entire thing. And I won't read the whole thing. We'll just read from the part where he says, "And then he said, 'Thomas, put your fingers here and see my hands, and put out your hands and place it in my side. Don't disbelieve, but believe.' Thomas answered, 'My Lord, my God.' Jesus said to him, 'What's the matter with you, Thomas? I should wash out your mouth with soap?'" Obviously, that's not what it says, is it? The point is that the context here can be explained. You don't have to keep looking. It's not there, Andrea. The context of what Thomas said can be explained by looking at the paragraph, can't it? What does Jesus do here? Thomas drops an F-bomb, and Jesus blesses him and other people for doing it? Of course not. Thomas here is explaining the fact that he believes that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Seems to me that this is a little bit more accurate understanding based on what Jesus says next, isn't it? Anybody still awake? So who's the passage written to? Continuing with our... Seriously? There we go. So when we're reading this text of Scripture, we need to know who the passage was written to, don't we? Is it our promise? Is it something that we should be grabbing onto? Or should we be reading it in a historical framework? Here's a good one. I heard this. I've never heard this in this church, but I have heard it in churches before. In fact, in the church that we were in prior, this was basically the verse for the women's ministry. You saw this thing everywhere. And it's Jeremiah 29:11, right? "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not evil, to give you a future and a hope." That's fantastic. That's a great promise to grab onto. The standard interpretation is that God has plans of prosperity for our life, usually used to encourage someone who's having hard times, and in fact the verse continues to talk about financial prosperity. So it's even used as a way of describing how God's going to restore you back financially. But instead of reading just a Bible verse, verse 11, let's look at verse 1 and see who it's written to. "These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent to Jerusalem, to surviving elders of exile and to priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Now this is your promise if you are a Jew in exile under Nebuchadnezzar. Now, does God have a plan for your life? Sure. But if you want to have a promise that you can grab onto, why don't you find one that was actually made for you? This is a prophecy. This is a prophetic utterance of how God was going to restore those Jews that were in exile in Babylon. And he did so. And that's what we should be reading out of that.